Pakistan's blasphemy law under the spotlight again after a Christian girl is accused of burning the Quran. Is the law being misused to persecute minorities, and is there any chance of changing it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Bah Thibault. The arrest of a Christian girl in Pakistan has once again raised the risk of violence committed in the name of religion. The girl is accused of burning pages of the Quran and is being held under Pakistan's anti-blasphemy law. This is the Christian neighborhood of Islamabad where she was arrested last week. Reports say a large crowd gathered outside the house as the young Christian girl was taken away. Now, there are conflicting reports about the details of the incident as well as the girl's age and mental state. Christians have reacted by holding protests in Karachi. Their demands: release the girl, Rimsha Masi, and repeal the anti-blasphemy law. Some have fled their homes in fear. Now, in the past, crowds have killed many of those accused of blasphemy, and politicians who advocate change to the legislation have also been targeted. Now, people are branded blasphemers in Pakistan on a regular basis. Some cases attract international attention. Armed men attacked 2 mosques in May 2010 and killed more than 90 worshippers of the Ahmadi sect. Hardline Sunnis often consider them blasphemers. In November 2010, a Christian labourer, Asia Bibi, was sentenced to death after a co-worker accused her of insulting Islam. The sentence is under appeal and Bibi is still in jail. Governor Salman Taseer and Federal Minister Shahbaz Bhatti were killed last year after they publicly called for the blasphemy law to be amended. And in July, thousands of people dragged a Pakistani man accused of desecrating the Quran from a police station in the city of Bahawalpur. They beat him to death and then set his body on fire. Well, Pakistan's blasphemy law applies to all faiths, but a couple of chapters have been added over the years referring specifically to Muslims. Section 295 states that whoever by words either spoken or written or by visible representation or by imputation, innuendo or insinuation directly or indirectly defiles the sacred name of the Holy Prophet Muhammad shall be punishable with death or imprisonment for life and shall be liable to fine. So today we ask, should Pakistan's blasphemy law be repealed? To talk more about this, we're joined by our guests from Karachi, Ayesha Tammy Haq, a barrister, law and civil rights activist. In Islamabad, Khalid Rahman, Director General of the Institute for Policy Studies, specializing in domestic and regional politics. And also from Islamabad, Aasim Sajjad, Professor of Political Economy at Quaid-i-Azam University and member of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party. Thank you all for taking part in Inside Story today. Ayesha Tammy Haq in Karachi, if I may start with you, what is your perspective on this? Is, in your opinion, Pakistan's blasphemy law being misused to persecute minorities and settle personal scores?
I absolutely do. I think it's misused. I mean, it's a bad law to start with, in my opinion. It's a man-made law. It has nothing to do with religion. If you look at our history, the history of Islam, the Prophet himself, the Holy Prophet, was exceptionally tolerant of people who were abusive to him. He never took any action against anyone who, who did anything horrible to him, like throw garbage on him or abuse him, do any such thing. So for him to have put up with all that and we can't, to me makes absolutely no sense. And as I said, this law was put on the statute books by people, not by God, and it's not even taken from any holy scripture. So I feel that the law, any law that's a bad law, is open to abuse, and this law has been abused not just to persecute minorities, but if you look at the cases, there are over 50 or 55%, I think, of the cases are blasphemy cases against Muslims themselves. So, it's a law that really needs to be reviewed. And not only that, I feel that, we need to now take cognizance of the fact that there is no rule of law in this country. So if you have any law that can be abused, people will abuse it and they'll get away with it.
But as you know, there are many people in Pakistan who support this law, who are convinced that it's a divine decree and that there is no questioning it, that it's un-Islamic to question it. So how do you convince these people that there needs to be changes to this law?
Well, perhaps the best way to convince them is to actually enforce the law, not necessarily the blasphemy law, but to enforce the penal code. For example, if somebody is charged with blasphemy, as we all know, there is a law in place. It's Section 295 of the Penal Code, and Section 295 lays out procedure and punishment for blasphemy. It doesn't mean that I can go and take the law into my own hands and decide that I'm going to kill somebody if I feel that they have committed blasphemy. Well, if I do that, then the law of Pakistan must take action against me, and I should then be hauled up on a murder charge and be sent to prison.
Okay, Khalid Rahman, now I understand that you support this blasphemy law and want it upheld. Can you tell us why, and how do you justify maintaining this law in its current form?
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk on this very important subject. I think the whole discussion needs to be seen in a larger perspective, which includes religious perspective, which includes historical perspective, which includes social perspective, and lately perhaps an economic dimension has also been added to that. Now, religiously, you see, the person of the Prophet is not an individual, a simple individual. The person of the Prophet in the Islam and among the Muslims is seen as the source of guidance for their Sharia. So in fact, it is one of the sources of guidance, and if that is shaken, that means the whole foundation of the Sharia are being shaken. So this should not be simply taken as that an individual has been insulted. An insulter, in fact, is targeting the source of Sharia, one of the sources of Sharia. But also in the historical context, it should be seen.
Just a point on what you just said. You say that Sharia should be taken into account here, but when you take the recent examples of these blasphemy cases, an 11-year-old girl, even though there's dispute over her exact age, and just a few years ago, a 9-year-old girl also accused of blasphemy for a spelling error. I mean, isn't there a misinterpretation here? Shouldn't the current law in its current form, be re-examined?
Let me first emphasize that there is a need for law, because if the Muslims are so sensitive on this issue, if there is no law, the violation of the general rule or the general law will continue, and the people will take every kind of action.
But recent events, Mr. Rahman, have shown that people are indeed taking action into their own hands. There's been so many cases of mobs, lynching and so on. So how does this law protect people, really?
Let me first conclude my first point, that it has a historical background as well. The law is there. The law basically originates from the 1860 Indian Penal Law. So that means which had a religious chapter, and that religious chapter also had certain clauses identifying blasphemous actions and their punishments. So for the last 150 years, there is case law that provides a lot of opportunity to define what is wrong and what is right. And as far as the social aspect is concerned, I would like to say that there are thousands and thousands of examples where Muslims and Christians and other non-Muslims are living together in this country. As far as the violation of law is concerned, it is basically against the vulnerables of the society, the weaker sections of the society, irrespective of the Muslims or not Muslims. So whenever there is a case which is regarded as a kind of blasphemy, then of course there is a reaction to that, and if that person who is alleged for blasphemy, if he is from the weaker section of the society, of course he has to face that reaction before the law really comes into practice.
Okay, let me bring in Aasim Sajjad, also in Islamabad. Aasim, give us your opinion of this. Do you think this law is being used to persecute minorities in Pakistan, Christians in particular, or is it targeting everyone in general? And just give us a bit more background of this legislation. How did it come into place, and what changes have been made over the years?
Well, I mean, I think I agree to an extent with what Khalid said about the law in general being used primarily to uphold a particular elitist social order. So I'm not necessarily so sure, however, that the solution is rule of law then, because if the law itself is used to cement sort of status and elite status and power, then it's a problem with the law more generally. But speaking about the blasphemy law in particular, obviously, you know, the facts speak for themselves. I think it was something like maybe 9, 10, maybe a dozen cases throughout the entire period of British colonial rule that were invoked under the blasphemy law. And since it was amended and put into its current form by General Ziaul Haq in the middle of the 1980s, we're talking about thousands of cases. Now,
and why do you think this is? Why are we seeing more cases? Is it a sign that Pakistan is becoming more religiously intolerant, perhaps?
Well, for sure, I mean, on the one hand, but it also tells you that the actual legal statute books and the overall sort of structural dictates within which the state operates were, as we all know, under Ziaul Haq, Islamized. So, you know, it sort of provided, as it were, you know, an impetus or in some ways state backing to whether it be mobs or whether it be the religious right in general, it could be to take the law into their own hands, or as it were, to take laws that were promulgated by a military dictator under the name of Islam and use those laws to define Islam as they will, and take it into the... But I want to suggest again that there is a problem here with the law per se. So I'm uncomfortable with this and what in Pakistan these days is becoming all too easy a slogan to raise, which is rule of law. I mean, if all of these laws are promulgated by military dictators, I want to have no part in the rule of that law. I'd rather have that repealed.
So what is the underlying issue then here as we see this violence? Is this about the mob culture in Pakistan?
Well, no, I mean, as I said, it's a complex issue. There's a number of issues. There's about how the state itself is constructed, the pillars upon which the state is constructed, including the law. And then, yes, and the way in which, you know, the formal sort of structure of the state actually provides support to, whether illicit or otherwise, to, I wouldn't just call them mobs. I mean, in this case, it's the religious right, which is being empowered and has been empowered over the last 30 years to take the law into its own hands, or as it were, to use laws that exist which facilitate its mob behavior or its resort to violence, to victimize the other, so to speak. And that could be the poor, it can be non-Muslims, it can be whoever, whatever the case may be. So I think it's a multi-dimensional issue, but as I suggested to you, I think the question, we need to go beyond just saying the rule of law should be you know, unequivocally or unambiguously just asserted. I think there's some laws in this country, in fact many laws, that actually need to be repealed.
Ayesha Tammy Haq in Karachi, why do you think some hardline Islamists have rejected the calls to change this law and have even gone as far as praising the assassination of politicians who have called for changes to this law? What is going on here, you think?
Well, it's political, obviously, and I agree with Dr. Aasim Sajjad about you know, this whole issue of repealing the law, and you know, bad laws really need to be looked at. As I said, in my opinion, the law is bad, and it needs to be reviewed. It needs to be repealed. But when I talk about the rule of law, so I'm just going to just clarify that. What I'm talking about is enforcing the penal code. You cannot take the law into your own hands. You cannot go and kill somebody. You can't burn people's houses down and get away with it. And the reason that the religious right is so empowered is because people are terrified. Even government is terrified. I mean, when the governor of Punjab was assassinated, the government ran for cover. They did absolutely nothing. They were completely silent. They capitulated. And had they taken any kind of decisive action in those few hours after his assassination, perhaps the reaction wouldn't have been so huge. Surely the Pakistan People's Party could bring 40 or 50,000 people onto the streets, you know, condemning his assassination, and that wouldn't have given, you know, the right, the religious right, the opportunity to mobilize and organize the way they did. So I think that, you know, we have a very serious problem here. And as you retreat, you cede more and more space to this religious right, and they grow, you know, in in the eyes of the public, I mean, they sound right because they're quoting from the scriptures, and nobody's going to question that.
Khalid,
we really need to question these things.
Let me ask Khalid Rahman in Islamabad his thought on this particular point that you just made. Do you think the government has been reluctant to act on some of the changes that have been proposed, notably by Sherry Rahman, the amendment to the blasphemy law, because of the pressure from the religious right, because they fear the extremists in the country?
Let me respond to this question relating to the background which Dr. Sajjad has given. I think while some amendments were made by General Ziaul Haq, but the death punishment was added in 1986 by the Parliament. And at that time, the Parliament gave these two options, death punishment as well as life imprisonment. The amendment in the law was challenged in the Federal Shariat Court, and after 4 or 5 years in 1990, the Federal Shariat Court came up with a consensus decision that there should be only death penalty. The government went to the Supreme Court, but then because of the say public opinion, the government did not pursue that. And in 1992, both houses of the Parliament, the lower house as well as the upper house, they came up with a resolution asking the government to maintain this death penalty. Now, keeping this background in view, I would like to raise this very important question that in 1986 the death punishment was introduced. After that, and that was a parliament, elected parliament, and after that we had 4 governments in 1990s and 2 governments in 2000s who have been elected. Now, there have been amendments also in laws as well as even in the constitution, but these representatives of the people, these elected people, did not make any amendment in this regard. Now that shows that the people of Pakistan want this. So what kind of democracy would be?
Yes, one of the arguments that the government has made for not changing this law is that a number of Pakistanis, the majority of the population, supports this blasphemy law, and some even in its current form. Well, we asked people in Islamabad what they think, and this is what some of them had to say to us. Take a listen.
As far as the blasphemy law is concerned, any Sharia law or any law, if implemented in bits and pieces, is never effective. In bits and pieces, if you try to implement things, people take advantage of it and they use it for their own vested interests. If you want to implement, the better way is to implement the Sharia law as a whole package. And yes, blasphemy law should be there, must be there. We are an Islamic ideological state. Pakistan was made on the Islamic principles and Islamic ideology.
Every Muslim is very conscious about this type of breach of law. Every Muslim wants breaches should be punished according to the law, irrespective of his religion. However, the implementation of this law should be according to true justice, and it should be avoided to punish any innocent person who has been wrongly allegated due to any social motive.
There should be Islamic law as our country was built on that basis, but there should be some checks and balances around it. The recent incident of an 11-year-old girl is unfortunate. She doesn't know the difference from right or wrong. She will learn what her family tells her. I don't think it's justified to punish an 11-year-old girl. There should be limitations to the law.
Aasim Sajjad in Islamabad, do you think it's really possible to bring about change to this law when such a large number of the population in Pakistan supports it?
You know, I mean, I with all due respect to what Khalid had to say about, you know, the necessity of thinking about the fact that if Parliament approves or passes or at least doesn't repeal a law, that means that the people of Pakistan are with the law, and the 3 interviewees that you've just mentioned. You know, 1986 was a partyless parliament, you know, headed by a military dictator. That to me doesn't sound like the people of Pakistan. And subsequent to that, and I think, you know, Tammy raised this point, yes, there are issues that have to do with a culture of fear that is cultivated in this country. My contention is, and I have reason to back this up based on what I have heard and seen over decades of living in this country, is that a large number of people in this country, including the representatives who ostensibly sit in Parliament, would be quite happy and willing to repeal this and many other laws. Let's not forget there's many other laws that have to do with minorities, that have to do with the poor, that have to do with tribal areas that are treated like like places that are in the Stone Age, that they would otherwise take on a repeal, but either the political will is lacking, or relatedly there's just simply a culture of fear. And what is considered public opinion, or how public opinion is constructed, to me is highly debatable and dubious. So I think the question, as ever, is whether that kind of political will can be generated over time to take on and to repeal, or at least amend, or to, in the larger scheme of things, to make legislation that really serves the people of Pakistan rather than a handful of dictators and his selected parliamentary stooges. And so that is what we have to contend with, and I think it'll take some time, but I firmly believe that there's plenty of maturity yet that we can attain in our, in our lawmaking and in the way we construct public opinion, so that we get rid of, whether you call it actually abuse of law or whether you call it bad laws, that actually end up harming the public interest rather than protecting it.
Ayesha Tammy Haq, what do you think is so specific about Pakistan? Because both India and Pakistan have this law, this secular law that applies to all faiths, but in India there seems to be less cases of blasphemy than in Pakistan. What is the underlying difference here, you think?
Well, number one, India has had a sustained democracy, and hence their systems are stronger, their institutions are stronger. Here you have military interregnums which are much longer than the democratic periods. And when you have a military interregnum, there is always a complete breakdown of, an institutional breakdown. So I think that that's one of the reasons. The other, of course, is that we have, over the last 65 years, we have moved further and further and further to the right institutionally at the state level, despite the fact that we've had a couple of periods of, say, like the Pakistan People's Party in government. Despite that, we've moved significantly to the right. Even a party like that has moved to the right in terms of their thinking and policy. But, what is really important is that unless the state protects its citizens, really nothing can be done. Here you have an 11-year-old girl who has Down syndrome. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you that if you have Down syndrome, you cannot form
There are conflicting
the capacity.
reports, of course. I must say that there are conflicting reports about her mental health, of course. Some have said,
well,
yes,
even
she has
then,
Down
if you're
syndrome.
11 years old, you cannot form a mental capacity to commit a crime. These are established rules of law. So why isn't the state protecting its citizens? This child is a citizen of Pakistan and she deserves to be protected.
Okay.
I mean, it's her right.
Right. Khalid Rahman, I'll give you the last word. Aisha made an important point there. How does the state, how does the Pakistani government go about protecting its citizens against such laws, and in particular its minorities, the Christian community? How do they do that?
I think the whole discussion needs to be in the right perspective. This is not the issue of minorities. Let me emphasize it again.
It may not be the issue of
cases
minorities, but many in the Christian community say they feel they are being targeted. So it makes it an issue, perhaps, at that level.
You see, the best way for such a kind of situation is to fight the case in the court of law. Now, those people who are taking demonstrations or who are threatening the alleged persons, they are doing wrong. But at the same time, I think our civil society and our Western friends, they also need to know that there are courts and they should fight the case in the courts. The courts are the best place to decide that whether an alleged person has committed a crime or not. So if the mob is doing wrong, what kind of right this civil society is doing? And I think the mob is reacting because there is a political dimension as well. Those who are objecting this law, they are not taking note of the human rights violation that are taking place in the country by those who are supposed to be the human rights protectors.
Okay.
Look at the scene. Look at the scene. What kind of drones attacks are taking place in Pakistan every day, and how many innocent people are being killed?
That's another discussion.
But
we're going to have to leave it there.
But that is related.
Yes, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we are running out of time. Thank you all for being on this edition of Inside Story. From Karachi, Ayesha Tammy Haq; in Islamabad, Khalid Rahman; and also in Islamabad, Aasim Sajjad. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send in your feedback, your comments, just email them to us at our usual address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.